How successful do you think you are in communication? Would you like to discover 2 communication skills, transform relationships, careers, and address conflicts? Research into scientific evidence shows why 85% of us think that we're good listeners, but actually only 2% of us are. Find out what is called radical candor and how it creates trust instead of destroying it. Welcome to Peace Unplugged and Happy New Year for 2026 on this cold January afternoon. In today's episode, we're studying some of the important facets of human communication. That is effective listening and candid response. These aren't just soft skills. They're essential for leadership, for healthy relationships, and for personal influence. Today, we'll look at 5 insights backed by neuroscience and psychology. These can significantly improve how we communicate with each other. I've learned many of these techniques in my working life, as well as my personal life. And believe me, I've made a few mistakes along the way. The truth is, we never stop learning. We can only practice. I'm sure many of you recognize that we can at times have difficult conversations in the workplace and also in our personal relationships. That's often because we're simply trying to be heard and understood. You only have to look at the way politicians and leaders miss the key elements to effective communication, and this is quite an endemic problem. So let's look at this subject in a little bit more detail, and I'll couple that up with some science-based research. So be sure to listen through to the end, where you'll find some solutions that I've researched for consideration. That is, ways that we can all improve our communication techniques. So part 1 of this is the listening illusion. Here's a startling fact. In studies where people rate their own listening skills, 85% consider themselves above average listeners. Yet those same individuals are observed and rated by others. Only about 2% demonstrate genuinely effective listening behaviours. I can testify to this by some training I did some 25 years ago. Try this. Get a small group of people together and choose one person, or decide yourself that you're going to stand up and speak on one subject. And perhaps that might be a personal hobby, for instance. Speak for 5 minutes and ask the people listening to take notes. What you find is when you ask them for feedback on what they heard, you'll realise how we naturally filter and misinterpret what has been said. Sometimes we even generalise on what we heard, and we can even mishear what has been said. Now, this gap reveals something. We're experiencing what researchers call the listening illusion. We believe we're listening when we're actually doing something entirely different. Most of us are engaged in what psychologists term listening to respond rather than listening to understand. You see, the problem runs deeper than we realise. Neuroscience research using the fMRI brain scans shows that when someone is speaking to us, our brains are simultaneously doing multiple things. That is, predicting what will be said next, then formulating our response, judging and relating their words to our own experiences. A study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology found the average person retains only 25% of what they hear in a conversation. That means that we're present physically, but absent cognitively. Here's where it creates a problem. The misunderstandings multiply. People feel unheard and devalued, and the conflicts escalate because we're talking past each other rather than connecting. The tension is everybody wants to be heard, but actually almost everyone is not listening. The solution comes from research on what scientists call active constructive listening. Studies at the University of California found that effective listeners do 3 specific things that transform communication. That is, firstly, they practice cognitive empathy, which means mentally taking the speaker's perspective without immediately filtering it through their own experience. Brain imaging shows that this activates different neural networks. That is what's called self-referential thinking. Second, they use strategic silence and minimal encouragers. Research shows that listeners who pause 2 to 3 seconds before responding and use brief acknowledgements like, "I see," or "tell me more," help speakers process their deeper thoughts. And that's even if there is a major conflict brewing. Try simply stating, "I agree you said that." The very least indicates that you are listening. Thirdly, they engage in reflective verification. That is paraphrasing what they heard and checking for accuracy. So you can say, If I understand you correctly, it shows the intention with politeness, and it shows that you're listening carefully. A landmark study in organizational psychology demonstrated that teams trained in these 3 techniques showed 40% improvement in problem solving and 56% reduction in communication-based errors. The key insights is that listening is an active skill requiring deliberate cognitive effort, not a passive state of waiting for your turn to talk. Let's now move on to part 2. That is the attention deficit crisis. Our modern world, as we know, has created significant challenges, particularly in effective listening. Research from Microsoft's Human Attention Span study reveals that the now average human attention span has dropped from 12 seconds in the year 2000 to just 8 seconds today. Apparently, this is less than the attention span of a goldfish. Meanwhile, we're constantly managing what researchers call continuous partial attention, where we're simultaneously monitoring phones, emails, and other distractions whilst supposedly listening to another person. Gloria Mark's research at UC Irvine found that knowledge workers switch tasks every 3 minutes on average and take 23 minutes to fully refocus. This creates a perfect storm for communication breakdown, and here's where it gets personal. Studies show that people can accurately detect when they have only partial attention from a conversation partner, even if that partner maintains eye contact and nods appropriately. Research in the Journal of Societal and Personal Relationships found that perceived divided attention during conversations creates feelings of devaluation and relationship dissatisfaction. The speaker's stress hormones actually increase when they sense distraction, yet we're trapped. Our work culture demands constant availability and multitasking. Our devices are designed to capture attention with notification systems, and we've developed what psychologists call FOMO, F-O-M-O, that is, fear of missing out. Makes single tasking feel inefficient. So how do we give genuine attention in a world designed to fragment it? Research on attentional control provides the answer through environmental design and strategic protocols. A study published in Computers in Human Behavior found that simply placing phones face down on a table during conversations reduces their negative impact. Getting it out of sight entirely improves conversation quality by 34%, and it increases empathy. So the concept of device-free zones, i.e. specific times and spaces where technology is completely absent, has shown positive results. Now that's a challenge, isn't it? Harvard Business School research demonstrated that meetings implementing 15-minute phone-free check-ins at the beginning improved decision quality and participant satisfaction. Additionally, neuroscience research on attention shows that prefrontal cortex, that's the area of control focus, can be strengthened through mindfulness training. An 8-week mindfulness program improved sustained attention capacity by 16%, according to studies at the University of Miami. If you'd like to engage in some mindfulness training, leave me a message in the comments. Simply type yes to mindfulness and leave me with a method of contact. I'll be happy to help. Practical application is creating what researchers call attentional rituals. So, for instance, that's closing your laptop, turning off the mobile phone, sitting in specific positions. These signal that there is protected time. Studies shows these rituals work because they create the right environment to communicate effectively. So now we'll move on to part 3, the empathy, accuracy, balance. One of the most common mistakes in listening is what psychologists call empathic inaccuracy. That means we feel like we're being empathetic, but we're actually projecting. That is projecting our own experiences onto someone else's situation. Research by psychologist Jamil Zaki at Stanford shows that when people try to understand others' emotions, they default to egocentric empathy. That is assuming that others feel what they themselves would feel in that situation. Although it's well-intentioned, it's very often inaccurate. Meanwhile, organizational research on feedback and candor reveals a double-edged problem. When we respond to what we've heard, we tend either to brutal honesty without empathy or empathetic dishonesty, and that avoids the truth. The challenge is navigating what Kim Scott in her research on workplace communication calls the radical candor framework. Studies show that most people fall into 3 failure modes. That is, ruinous empathy. So that's like caring personally, but not making any challenges. Then there is obnoxious aggression. That's challenging directly, but not really caring personally. Or there's manipulative insincerity, and that's neither caring nor challenging. Research published in the Academy of Management journal found that 67% of managers avoid giving direct feedback because they fear damaging relationships. Yet the same research shows that avoiding honest feedback is precisely what damages trust long term. Employees report feeling disrespected when given vague, sugar-coated feedback because it suggests their manager doesn't trust them with the truth. So, we're stuck in a paradox, aren't we? Being too harsh and damaging relationships, or being too soft and enabling problems to continue. The breakthrough comes from combining what researchers call psychological safety with constructive candor. Google's Project Aristotle, which studied 180 teams to identify success factors, found that psychological safety, i.e., the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up, was the number one predictor of the team performance. But safety alone isn't enough. Research by Brené Brown and others showed that effective candor requires 3 elements. First, establishing relational trust before challenging conversation studies shows that even 2 to 3 minutes of personal connection beforehand dramatically improves receptivity to difficult feedback. Second, framing feedback as, here's what I observed, rather than here's what you are, reduces defensive reactions by 47%, according to communication research. Third, pairing challenges with a genuine belief in the person's capability. This is what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck's research shows. It activates a growth mindset rather than a threat response. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology demonstrated that feedback delivered with this structure increased behaviour change by 62% compared to traditional feedback approaches. The key is that candor without empathy is cruelty, but empathy without truth is condescension. Combination of the two creates respect. So we now move to part 4, question quality principle. Most of us believe we're engaging in dialogue when we're actually conducting what is known as parallel monologues. That is taking turns in broadcasting our own thoughts rather than building a shared understanding. Again, let's look at the way politicians behave in Parliament. They act out like verbal gladiators, always seeking one-upmanship with attempts at wit and the final word. And that's essentially for their own benefit. Research on conversation dynamics reveals that the average person asks fewer than 5 questions per conversation. And most of those are closed questions, seeking simple yes or no answers or factual information. Meanwhile, studies on negotiation, therapy, and investigative interviewing have identified specific questioning techniques that dramatically improve information quality and relationship depth. The difference between average and exceptional communicators isn't just how well they listen, it's the quality of the questions that they ask. So here's another dilemma. We avoid deep questions for several reasons. First, research shows that we fear appearing ignorant or intrusive. Studies in social psychology find that people systematically underestimate how much others appreciate being asked thoughtful questions, what researchers call the question liking gap. Second, genuine curious questions require admitting uncertainty, which feels vulnerable in cultures that reward appearing knowledgeable. Third, deep questions demand that we slow down and truly process answers, which conflicts with our efficiency-focused communication norms. The result is most conversations stay safely superficial, rarely reaching the real understanding. Yet research consistently shows that the most successful leaders, salespeople, therapists, and relationship partners are distinguished by their questioning patterns, not their speaking eloquence. Communication researchers identified specific question types that show deeper listening and more honest responses. Harvard Business School professor Alison Wood Brooks conducted studies showing that asking follow-up questions, that is, questions that demonstrate that you've absorbed what was said and want to go deeper, increase the likability and trust by up to 52%. The most powerful follow-ups use what's called the Tell Me More framework. That is open-ended invitations that give the speaker control over what to explore next. Second, research on motivational interviewing reveals that open-ended hypothetical questions bypass any defensive reactions. So instead of asking, why did you do that, which then justifies some kind of justification, you could try asking, what would it look like if this had gone differently? That activates problem-solving thinking. Third, studies show that comparative questions, enhancing understanding. How does this compare to the past experience? That helps the speaker contextualize and helps you to understand their reference of framework. A meta-analysis of psychotherapy effectiveness found that therapists who asked 40% more questions than average achieved better client outcomes, specifically because questions conveyed genuine curiosity and prevented premature conclusions. The practical application is what researchers call the question ratio. That is, aiming for at least 5 to 7 questions per 10 minutes of conversation in meaningful discussions. Studies tracking negotiators found that those who asked more questions closed deals with 20% better terms and maintained stronger relationships post-negotiation. The mechanism is simple. Questions signal respect, and they create psychological safety, and they're likely to prevent premature closure, and that's likely to kill understanding as well as candor. So moving to part 5, that is the non-verbal truth channel. While we focus intently on words, both when listening and responding with candor, research shows that 65 to 93% of communication impact comes from non-verbal channels. TLA psychology research found that body language, facial expressions, tone, timing often convey completely different messages than spoken words. This creates what psychologists call leakage, when our true thoughts and our feelings leak through non-verbal channels, even if our words say something different. I had a recent personal experience of this during a Zoom call where an organisation were attempting to sell me their product. The person I spoke to asked me loads of questions, and they were relevant to try to help me to solve problems. The issue was he tried to close a deal with me immediately, but when I tried to indicate to him that I wanted to carry out due diligence, that was to check to see if his service was legitimate, I noticed a cynical glint in his eye. He didn't give up at that point, but he kept on trying to get to close the deal. I didn't buy straight away, and I kind of bypassed things by agreeing to another appointment the next day. So I chose not to respond to that second invitation. Effective listening requires reading the channels, and candid responding requires alignment between verbal and non-verbal messages. Yet, most people have limited awareness of their own non-verbal communication and limited skills in reading others. So the challenge is multifaceted. First, culture research shows that non-verbal communication varies significantly across different cultures. Eye contact that signals attention in one culture can signal disrespect in another. This creates potential for serious miscommunication in diverse environments. Second, neuroscience reveals that we process non-verbal cues unconsciously and quickly. Initial impressions form in just 50 milliseconds, according to Princeton research. However, these snap judgments can be inaccurate. Studies show that we're particularly bad at detecting deception and often mistake nervousness for dishonesty. Third, research on emotional labor demonstrates that constantly managing facial expressions and body language to appear appropriately attentive or agreeable is cognitively exhausting, and it can lead to burnout. Yet, if there's misalignment between our words and our non-verbal signals, saying I'm listening while checking your phone or delivering some honest feedback while avoiding appropriate eye contact, the non-verbal message dominates. Research shows that when verbal and non-verbal messages conflict, believe the non-verbal message 85% of the time. The solution lies in what researchers call congruent communication. That's ensuring alignment between the verbal and the non-verbal. Studies by communication expert Albert Mehrabian and others have identified specific behaviours that signal genuine engagement. The first of those is mirroring. That is subtly matching the other person's posture and energy levels. It increases rapport and perceived understanding by 31%, according to research in social psychology. This happens naturally in connected conversations, but it can also be intentionally cultivated. Second, research on paraverbal communication shows that matching emotional tone while responding, i.e., speaking with warmth when delivering care, with seriousness when addressing concerns, it increases message acceptance by 44%. Third, studies on eye contact reveal maintaining eye contact 60 to 70% of the time while listening, with natural breaks to process, signals attention without creating discomfort. When delivering candid feedback, research shows that steady but kind eye contact reduces perceptions of aggression while maintaining perceived honesty. A fascinating study in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior found that training people to recognize 6 specific facial microexpressions, briefly involuntary facial expressions lasting 1/25th of a second, improved their ability to detect true emotions by 35%. For candid communication, the key finding from organisation research is that perceived authenticity matters more than perfect delivery. Studies show that leaders who acknowledge nervousness, i.e., "this is a difficult conversation for me too," while maintaining steady presence, are rated as more trustworthy than those projecting artificial confidence. The practical application is simple. Before important conversations, taking 60 seconds to align your physical state with your intention, relaxing shoulders, establishing open posture, steadying the breath. It creates non-verbal congruence that dramatically improves overall communication successfully. So we've explored 5 areas of effective listening and candid communication, each of those supported by substantial research. So let me leave you with 5 actionable solutions that you can try. Number 1, practice the 3-part listening protocol. Use cognitive empathy to take the speaker's perspective. Use pauses before responding, and verify your understanding through reflective paraphrasing. This transforms comprehension and connection. Number 2, create attentional rituals. Establish device-free zones and physical cues that signal protected attention time. Move your phone entirely from sight, especially during an important conversation. Consider some brief mindfulness practice, or perhaps some training in that. It will strengthen your attentional control. Number 3, apply the radical Candor framework. Build psychological safety through brief personal connection. Frame feedback as an observation rather than as a judgment. And pair challenges with a genuine belief in capability. Remember that truth delivered with care creates respect, not resentment. Number 4, increase your question ratio. Aim for 5 to 7 thoughtful questions per 10 minutes of meaningful conversation. Use follow-up questions. These will demonstrate that you've absorbed what's been said. Use open-ended hypothetical questions. That way you'll bypass any possible defensiveness. And also use comparative questions. That way you'll provide some context. Number 5, align verbal and non-verbal channels. Practice congruent communication by matching posture and tone to content, maintaining 60 to 70% eye contact while listening, and taking 60 seconds before important conversations. That way, you align your physical state with your intention. Authenticity beats perfection. The research is that effective listening and candid responding aren't innate talents. They're learnable skills with significant impact on relationship quality, professional success, and personal influence. Studies show that even the modest improvements in these areas create much better returns. It suggests that teams with better listening dynamics outperform others by 25% on complex tasks. Relationships where partners practice active listening report 42% higher satisfaction. Leaders who combine empathy with candor see 31% better team performance. The most encouraging finding is that small, consistent practice creates fast and effective improvements. Research shows that deliberately applying even one of these techniques for 21 days begins to embed it into natural behavior. Start with whatever resonates most with you. And why not start today? Every conversation is an opportunity to practice listening that honors the speaker, and after, responding with candor can build trust. Thank you for listening today. Let me know your feedback in the comments section. Here's wishing you peace in your future communications. Martin.